Good morning or afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'm a marketing specialist here at Educate 360. Welcome to today's webinar, Securing Your AWS Cloud, presented by our amazing technical instructor for today, Dean Tilton. We are in Zoom for today's session, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you in an email after the webinar. We do encourage participation throughout the webinar, so please use that chat or the Q&A option for our short Q&A after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today, so without further ado, I will now hand it over to you, Dean.
Great. Thank you, Mariella. Appreciate it. Well, welcome everyone. Our topic, as was mentioned, are securing your AWS cloud. And I'd like to share with you all here a series of some PowerPoints along with some live demonstrations to look at some of the various services that can assist us with securing the cloud environment, particularly AWS. Now, before I do that, just briefly here, whenever we get into the topic of security, we always want to address and have in mind what's referred to as the security triad, which encompasses the confidentiality of our data, the integrity of the data, and the availability of the data. Now, those are some kind of fancy terms, but basically confidentiality refers to who can read it. The integrity of the data is used to determine whether there's been a modification or a change. And the third one, the availability. We want to ensure that the data is available. If a server is down or overwhelmed and can't respond, we can't access the data. Well, with that, let me go ahead and share with you here the screen. I'll close this one here and pull up the display. There we go. Securing your AWS cloud. Now here, a list of some of the various topics and services we'll take a look at. Now, we only have just around half an hour, so it's just very briefly, but at least to expose us to some of the various tools and services that can help preserve the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our data. And I would also like to mention that with AWS, security is job zero, is what they cite there. Basically, that means that security permeates and percolates through everything they do at AWS. Now, the topics here include understanding these security services, applying security design principles, and accessing further learning resources. And the first one I'd like to start off with, it's not actually a service, but it's a guide of proven principles, practices, and procedures. It's the AWS Well-Architected Framework. This framework encompasses now 6 pillars. I think originally it was 4, and over time they added a 5th, and more recently, I think about a year and a half ago, that 6th one there, sustainability. We're going to focus here on the security pillar, and the topics, the various services fall under these 6 categories for compliance, identity and access management, which you'll typically see as IAM, protecting our infrastructure with our virtual private clouds, and ultimately, the prize there is the data, right? Data protection, detecting potential breaches, and responding to an incident. It's probably not so much a question of if there's an incident, but when. Now, here, as a very beneficial tool we have with our AWS Well-Architected Framework, the AWS Well-Architected tool. What's nice about this is that whereas the framework is really, it's a PDF file. It's a, well, you can view it via HTML documentation. The tool gives us an easy and convenient way to work through it. And I'd like to do just a brief demonstration. I actually like to do brief demonstrations on several of these items. And I've already logged in with my account using the trainer role here, and you can see a link here to the well-architected tool where you can create a workload. I've created one here called sample, specifically a lens known as the AWS well-architected framework. And drilling down, you can see these 6 pillars. Of course, our emphasis here is on security. When I click on it, it basically encompasses a collection of 11 questions. Let's just show you a sample of one here. So the idea is you would go through these series of questions, selecting in this first one here, how do you securely operate your workload? And so you would check the boxes next to the ones that apply to you. And so having gone through all the questions, then it'll make recommendations of how you can harden, secure your environment. Right. I'll look at some of the specific services now. The first, compliance. Many of you all may work in an industry where you're required to comply with certain industry standards. Documentation for compliance in the cloud is made available through AWS artifacts. This will provide, if you're audited, the documentation that they're looking for to prove, yes, we do adhere to those standards. We do, AWS does meet those requirements. You can see that here by navigating to that service where I can view reports and agreements to demonstrate compliance. Now, there are a lot. There's some 279 of these reports. I'm going to go ahead and pick one of them here. If you are part of the defense industrial base, in other words, if you're a contractor for the Department of Defense, you are required, and soon it'll become an audit that they're going to mandate for what's known as the NIST Special Publication 800-171. And it's still in the ruling process, but there's something known as a Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. By selecting that, you can download the report to prove that the data you're housing within AWS, let's say an S3 bucket, that you can provide that documentation to show you're compliant. In fact, actually, I've already downloaded one to show you what it looks like right here. So this provides that demonstration, that documentation that they would be looking for. It also may be that you need to adhere to the compliance within the organization. That's where AWS Config comes into play. Continuously audits and assesses your compliance of the various AWS resources, the services that you're using, how they're configured, and ensuring that they adhere to your organization's policies and guidelines. So again, it's constantly monitoring the configuration you have with your AWS services that you're employing to adhere to your organization's compliance demands. AWS config. And it'll basically step you through here. You can see there's 3 steps for setting that up. Now, this is maybe the first one that perhaps most folks would think of, your identity and access management. Your users, your groups, your devices. We want to have and ensure that each user is uniquely identified. We don't want to have shared passwords in order for traceability. Some others that they point out here, the securing the root account. When you get a subscription to AWS, you're given a root account, which you'll almost never use, except at the very beginning. There are some special cases. Typically, the root account is associated with your subscription. With it, you would create an administrator. It's recommended you'd secure it through multi-factor authentication. There's a few other best practices as well. And then pretty much after that, you don't use it. Then you'd use your administrator account. And with an administrator account, you typically have two accounts. The administrator account when you perform your administrative roles, and then another account when you're not performing that. Although we could give everyone admin credentials, we want to apply the principle of least privileges. In other words, we want to give you just enough permissions to do the task at hand and not more. That way, if your account is compromised, you can reduce the blast radius. That is, you can reduce the damage done for that compromised account. And you can even use things like roles, which provide short-term access. I think it defaults to an hour, maybe up to 12 hours. That's actually what I'm using here. I'm using, you can see actually the role I'm using in the upper right-hand corner. I created a role called trainer that I'm using. Here, let me go ahead and navigate to our identity and access management, where you can define your users, groups, roles. Now, I've been using some other services that created some roles. The one, actually, let me navigate over here. So there's my trainer role that was created for demonstration. Actually, clicking on that role, you can see some of the settings there associated with it, including that it's using a policy called administrator access. There's lots of policies. That's actually the next item there. Policies, a collection of permissions. You see a list right there. Let me go ahead and click on this one called administrator access. So this is very powerful. It basically gives you full control to all of the 418 services. So you want to be kind of careful who gets assigned to that particular role. Others include protecting the infrastructure. Now, there are a lot of services available to AWS. It may be that you don't need a virtual private cloud, which is basically a virtual network where you would place your EC2 instances, your virtual machines. You may not need it. Just depends upon the needs of your organization. And if you're kind of new to all of this with AWS, you might want to start off with, maybe the storage service that they have, S3, the simple storage service. Start building some confidence with that, then kind of expand out. But here, let me say a few things here related to these four. First of all, the virtual private cloud, among other things, it will include security groups, and I'll show you where this is found, to protect the individual hosts, to block traffic coming in, but allow traffic out, and then you can enable certain traffic through it. So that's protecting your host, kind of like a personal firewall. A network access control is kind of like a perimeter firewall for permitting or denying access in and out based upon ports, protocols, and IP addresses. Now, there's a special type of firewall specifically for web applications, those that operate at layer 7 of the OSI model. The web access firewall here is to protect your web apps from, and I don't know if you're familiar with this here, the OWASP's top 10. And those list the top 10 types of attacks for web applications. Maybe I should even let me just take a moment here to show you this. You might find this of interest. Here is the OWASP top 10. And they reevaluate it every few years. So historically, injection attacks, that's actually fallen down to number 3, but it highlights areas of concern, particularly for web applications, okay, to help protect. And that's what this firewall is for. your web application firewall to help protect you against those types of common web exploits as shown in the OWASP top 10. Actually, below that, here you have AWS Shield, designed to help protect you, among other things, from distributed denial of service attacks. Those attacks targeting a system to overwhelm it with traffic, to thus cripple it, make it, in a sense, unavailable, in some cases, even downs the system. I remember old Windows 95 systems were subject to what they called the ping of death. You send enough pings to that Windows 95 system, you could crash it, or old Windows Server, the blue screen it. So anyway, AWS Shield there designed to protect against those types of attacks. And our Amazon Inspector. With Amazon Inspector, think EC2, your EC2 instances, your elastic cloud compute, scans and discovers software vulnerabilities on those EC2 instances. Vulnerabilities are your weaknesses. And threats attempt to exploit those weaknesses, thus producing risk. Security is all about managing risk. It's risk management. If we can't eliminate the threat, we attempt to reduce the vulnerabilities. Risk equals threats plus our vulnerabilities. Here, Amazon Inspector, automated and continual vulnerability management for your EC2 instances at scale. Other services include, and this can get a bit involved, but they simplify a lot of it if you want to. AWS Key Management Services, centrally managed keys for cryptographic operations. So this is a little bit more of an advanced feature when we talk about cryptography. Basically, within cryptography, we're dealing with encryption to preserve the confidentiality of your data. That's the first of those three in the security triad. Cryptography also includes hashing algorithms to maintain the integrity of your data. That's number two in that security triad. So now they're not the only ways we have to preserve the confidentiality and integrity, but they represent a means or method of doing that. It turns out with your key management services, there's actually a couple of different types. The first, historically, which has been available actually for centuries, is what's known as symmetric encryption. So you go to create a key, you have an option of choosing that type. Okay, which worked great for hundreds of years until the 1970s with our advent of networks. And it didn't work so well because you'd have to, you'd send an encrypted file across the network, but then you had to send a decryption key across the network. And well, that didn't work because the hacker could intercept that too. So in the 70s, we had a new form called asymmetric encryption. First commercial implementation, RSA, Revisher Edelman, the authors, which use public and private keys. Now, you can use those public and private keys a variety of ways with your key management services. It can generate those for you. That's pretty nice. Now, there are other tools you can use. Here you can see it's RSA, Revisher Edelman. There's another one here called elliptic curve, ECC. Doesn't quite have the same overhead that RSA, but there's differences. Now, you can also, by the way, let AWS kind of handle a lot of that there for you. And then the other service related to it, the AWS Secrets Manager. Interesting. Managing your secrets. What are secrets? Well, they could be shared passwords. Now, again, kind of want to avoid that, generally speaking. Your public and private keys, database credentials, API keys. This is basically developers can interface with applications programmatically with APIs. So their keys, secure shell keys. I'll throw in another one here, connection strings. Sometimes, now again, it's not a recommended practice, but sometimes developers will embed a password in a connection string. Again, you typically don't want to do that, but that is an option. Our secrets manager allows us to be able to store those, store a secret. Now, most of them actually you'll see are related to databases. Of the ones shown here, you can see these four are related to the credentials for databases. But if you choose other type of secrets, that's pretty much everything else. And selecting that one allows you to specify a key value pair or a name value pair. One of our services. Now, these two typically go together. AWS Cloud Trail, they basically keep a paper trail of activity of who did what and when. And it does so through logging that activity, logging AWS account activity to adhere to meet your needs for governance, which is where the organization is dictating what's allowed and what's not allowed, for compliance purposes, for auditing needs, AWS Cloud Trail. And then with Cloud Watch, you can take those logs and specify notifications, alarms, alerts when a certain threshold is met. Here are Cloud Trail. Continuously log your AWS account activity. Capture, store, by the way, it's going to store it in an S3 bucket. And can be used in conjunction with Cloud Watch to extract from that noise of data you've collected in those log files actionable information. Cloud Watch. And our last two here, incident management and AWS Lambda kind of makes it in just about every uh, session. First of all, incident management. As I mentioned earlier on, it's probably not so much a question of if, but when an incident would occur. And so we can set up some type of response when an incident does occur, who to notify, who to contact, a call tree. Maybe if it's one type of issue, let's say some type of natural disaster, we contact person X. Maybe it's if it's a cyber breach, person Y. Again, with an incident manager, we can define a plan, a strategy for how to respond to that incident. General settings, contact details, escalation plans, response plans can be configured. And the final one that they list here, and this is, by the way, not an exhaustive list. These are just highlighting some key services, but there are others. AWS Lambda. It's not necessarily, in one sense, it's new. In one sense, with from the view, computing historically, but it has been around for a little while. It allows us, among other things, to do automation. Basically invoke a block or snippet of code in response to an event. What to me is so very powerful about AWS Lambda, historically, we would have traditional computer systems where you get a purchase approval, the hardware arrives, you configure the hardware and the software. Then you had virtual machines, which basically abstracted away the hardware, allowing you to run multiple virtual machines on the same physical machine. Then you had containers, which allowed you to abstract away the operating system. The container contains everything the application needs in order to run. Well, as a next logical progression with our serverless computing, for example, like with Lambda, you abstract away the actual application. We're basically invoking snippets of code in response to some event, which makes them highly scalable and can be used to automate. And it's recommended we try to automate as much as possible, including our security. Anyway, we have just a few minutes left here before we close our session. I wanted to give an opportunity here. Actually, let me go ahead and this is not quite yet the end here. So let me actually stop sharing that window. And just to give you an opportunity, if you do have any questions, here, let me stop sharing that one and bring this up here. So anyway, just in the last 2 or 3 minutes here, you're welcome to post it there in the chat window. And if not, I do want to thank you for joining us for this time. Again, just kind of a brief tour of looking at some of the different services that are available with AWS to secure. And again, I just, that AWS well-architected framework, particularly the tool, can be a big help if you're not too sure where to go. Where do I start? Try starting with that AWS well-architected tool. It will help uncover your security needs for hosting your resources up in the cloud. Again, thanks again for joining me. And I'll be sticking around here for a few minutes for those who might have some questions. If you are taking off, I wish you a nice afternoon. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dean. This is a lot of great info. And I just wanted to take a second to remind our audience that if they need any more info on this topic, they can visit us at newhorizons.com. And if they missed out on any part of the session, we will be sharing a recording with all of you in an email at the end of the webinar. I think we had a quick question here about PDUs. Yes, absolutely. This will count towards, it will be half a credit. And if I'm not mistaken, this will be filed under Ways of Working Misty. So yeah, go right ahead and file us under Quick Ways of Working PDU and get that credit. I believe that should be our only question that we had. So thank you so much again, Dean, for all of this excellent info. And thank you all so much for attending today. If you guys have any more questions or need any more info, Dean will be available to answer anything. But other than that, thank you all so much again for attending, and we will see you all very soon. Bye, everyone. Bye, Dean.